Welcome to the debate. When a fire alarm goes off in a crowded building, the expectation is just absolute clarity. There's smoke, there's fire, you evacuate.
Right, you don't sit around debating the decibel level of the alarm.
Exactly. You just act. But what happens when that alarm goes off on national television in front of 51 million people? Half the room thinks they're seeing a genuine, five-alarm crisis, while the other half insists the smoke is, well, it's just a theatrical illusion pumped into the room by a broken system.
And that's when you get a total short circuit of the democratic process.
Yeah. So today, we're digging into the historical accounts, the journalistic fallout, and some fascinating new data on media bias to figure out what really happened during that June 27, 2024 presidential debate.
The one between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Right. It was a 90-minute televised event that completely derailed a campaign and, ultimately led to President Biden's withdrawal. We're looking at two vastly different interpretations of that night. I'll be arguing that this debate objectively revealed a genuine crisis of capability that the media rightfully and responsibly exposed.
And I'll be arguing that the media's reaction actually exemplifies a systemic bias, one that reduces the presidency to a mass marketing personality contest and just completely ignores substantive policy and governing ability.
Now, if you were watching this at home, like millions of people were, you weren't thinking about academic media theory, right? You were watching a visceral human moment.
Sure.
From my perspective, what happened on that stage in Atlanta, it was an undeniable empirical failure of capability. It was not a media creation. I mean, we saw a candidate with a stiff gait, speaking in this haltingly hoarse voice.
It was definitely a rough presentation.
Yeah, repeatedly trailing off mid-sentence, confusing billion with million. And this wasn't just partisan spin. The severity of the crisis was confirmed by those closest to the president. I mean, even Joe Biden admitted she was frightened and thought he might be having a stroke on stage.
Wow, yeah.
And Thomas Friedman, right, a longtime friend and New York Times columnist, he wept while watching it. When the people who know you best are reacting with terror and grief, that's objective reality. That's a real capability crisis.
Well, I don't deny the performance was poor. Anyone with eyes saw that. But the fallout, the reaction, was disproportionately driven by the media's obsession with what academics call strategy framing.
Okay, explain that.
They're basically calling a horse race. They're focusing on who looks weak, who is winning, the aesthetics of character, instead of evaluating a leader's actual policies, which would be issue framing. And there's a reason they do this. Strategy framing is cheap to produce, and it's highly engaging.
It sells.
Exactly, it sells. Policy analysis requires deep expertise, but spotting a stiff gait, that just requires eyeballs? The system is economically wired to prioritize the spectacle. That's why the academic study we're looking at shows a staggering 84% of election headlines focused on personality rather than policy.
84%?
Yeah, and because of this hyperfixation on Biden's delivery, the media largely ignored Trump's 106 attacks, his 50% off-topic rate, and just a constant stream of falsehoods. It completely distorted the democratic process.
I hear that, but let's look at the context of that performance. The Biden team explicitly asked for this early debate. We have the campaign memo from April laying out their logic, right? They wanted to project strength.
Right, to highlight Trump's weaknesses before the conventions.
Exactly. Yet, when given the exact platform he requested, Biden couldn't articulate his own core policies. When asked about the national debt, he fumbled a description of key health initiatives and ended a trailing sentence by claiming, we finally beat Medicare.
Yeah, that was a highly scrutinized moment.
Right. So if a CEO throws and mumbled incoherently during a high-stakes shareholder meeting, a meeting they themselves called, mind you, the board would be obligated to replace them. Isn't the presidency fundamentally about crisis communication just as much as behind-the-scenes decision-making?
Well, I hear the CEO analogy, but I think it conflates two totally different skill sets. You see, a debate is a marketing exercise. It's a taste test between Coke and Pepsi in front of 50 million people.
But it's the commander-in-chief?
Sure, but being president isn't about pitching the soda. It's about running the supply chain. Governing involves making complex, slow-moving geopolitical decisions cushioned by vast departments of highly capable experts.
The medical analysis from our sources really distinguishes between the job of becoming president and being president.
Okay.
The panic we saw was a manufactured response to a failed marketing event. It actually told us very little about his executive governance behind closed doors.
I have to admit, I struggle to untangle the media's reaction here if we're blaming it entirely on a manufactured, profit-driven narrative. I know the academic data shows a high baseline of bias.
Right, 44% of the analyzed media articles in the study were intentionally biased. The polarization is just absolute. I mean, the Daily Caller published 100% negative bias toward Harris, while the New York Times published 100% negative bias toward Trump.
Wow.
Outlets use tonality bias, basically reporting selectively to cultivate a specific, favorable vibe for their target audience, while completely abandoning true objectivity.
Exactly. The polarization is usually absolute, which is exactly why the post-debate reality breaks that model for me. After that night, 10 out of 12 New York Times columnists explicitly said Trump won.
Yeah, they did.
And the traditionally left-leaning New York Times editorial board published a piece urgently calling for Biden to drop out. So if the media is purely driven by partisan ideological bias, as the study suggests, how do you explain the unified shock and calls for withdrawal from the very media institutions that traditionally favored Biden?
Well,
Doesn't that prove the severity of his decline transcended typical media bias?
you say they were shocked, but the network basically built the track for a horse race that night. It just proves the media is completely captive to the optics. Look at the moderation. CNN's Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, they chose not to fact-check the candidates in real time.
Right, that was a big point of contention.
Huge.
And because of that structural choice, the media ecosystem effectively prioritized the aesthetic of Biden's struggle over the truthfulness of Trump's claims. I mean, Trump used the word Palestinian as a slur. He made absurdly hyperbolic, fact-free statements.
He did.
But because Biden looked frail, the media gave Trump a total pass on substance. They abandoned objectivity for the aesthetics.
But again, we have to look at agency here. The network didn't force those rules on them. The Biden campaign itself agreed to muted mics and a lack of real-time fact-checking. They hired Ron Klain to prep him at Camp David for a week.
Right, they wanted the muted mics to prevent the chaotic interruptions of 2020.
Exactly. It was a self-inflicted strategic blunder. If you design the battlefield and you still can't capitalize on the format, I mean, that is further proof of a capability crisis.
Well, it certainly was a failure of campaign strategy. I'll give you that. But the broader impact is that the media's reaction deprived the voters of what they actually needed. We needed an analysis of the Supreme Court, of foreign policy, of reproductive rights.
Instead, we got
endless weeks of analysis about a raspy voice and a stiff walk. It is a fundamental failure of the press to inform the electorate when 84% of the headlines ignore what a politician will actually do in office.
I still look at the June 27 debate as a harsh but entirely necessary stress test for the highest office in the land. The unified alarm we saw across the board, from medical professionals analyzing his presentation to journalists and his own family, it tells me the media didn't invent this narrative.
You think they just reported it?
Yes, they successfully fulfilled their democratic duty to hold a leader accountable for a highly visible decline in capability.
And I maintain that the event is a stark cautionary tale. By filtering the entire election through a 90-minute personality spectacle, it just proved that modern political coverage prioritizes the aesthetics of performance over the reality of governance.
Well, I think we can both agree that the debate was a disaster for the Biden campaign, one that permanently altered the trajectory of the 2024 election.
Undeniably.
But whether that fallout was a triumph of democratic accountability or a glaring failure of a media apparatus addicted to horse race strategy framing, well, that is something we'll leave unresolved.
There are definitely many more layers to explore in the source material regarding campaign strategy and media theory.
Absolutely. Think back to that fire alarm going off in the crowded room. Was the smoke coming from a genuinely failing foundation, or was the alarm system itself just hardwired to panic?